The U.S. president is in Ukraine, and meanwhile, China's top diplomat preparing to hold talks in Moscow on a potential peace settlement. Wang Yi is championing the call for dialogue and a peaceful means to end the war, echoing what he said earlier at the Munich Security Conference. And China has so far refrained from condemning the invasion of Ukraine. At the same time, it denies claims by the United States preparing to give arms to Russia. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned China against providing weapons, saying that would lead to serious consequences.
向战场源源不断提供武器的是美方，而不是中方。美方没有资格对中方发号施令，我们也从不接受美国对中俄关系指手画脚，甚至胁迫施压。中方在乌克兰问题上的方针归结为一句话。 就是劝和促谈。
And for more, CNA's Lo Minmin joins us live from Shanghai. Minmin, so far all peace talks, attempts rather, to have these talks have had very little to show for them, for all sorts of different reasons. Could China bring anything to the table to change that dynamic?
Well, look, China and Russia are both big independent countries, and President Xi Jinping and President Putin are both strong men in their own right. And so it's hard to say how much leverage China has on Russia, and if it has, how much it's willing to use it. Because remember, China wouldn't want to look as if it has betrayed its friend and risked the wrath of this giant neighbor that is a nuclear power that's literally sitting on its northern doorstep. And not to mention that Beijing and Moscow are united by this common worldview that the U.S. is a threat to their common interests. So that puts Beijing in a very awkward position, because experts are saying that China also doesn't have an interest in seeing this prolonged war in Ukraine that is harming its own international image. And China is already suffering from the collateral damage that this war has wreaked on the global economy. And we know that President Xi Jinping is going to make this big speech calling for peace on the anniversary of the Ukraine war this Friday, and it's also going to put forward this position paper calling for the sovereignty of all nations, including Ukraine's, to be respected. But how much that will really influence the decisions of Russia, I think we have to manage our expectations there.
Minmin, likely Mr. Wang Yi headed for Moscow without knowing for sure that President Biden would be going to Kyiv. He's turned up right now. But inadvertently or otherwise, does this pairing up suggest any kind of allegiance that we should be reading anything into?
Well, it's certainly very symbolic, especially the timing coming just so close to the one-year anniversary of the Ukraine war. And the optics-wise, it's looking as if China is literally standing with Moscow and the U.S. is standing with Kyiv. But I think that's not necessarily the kind of message that Beijing wants to send out to the world right now. And certainly Wang Yi's trip to Moscow is now being overshadowed by this U.S. comment hanging over him, suggesting that China is planning or is considering to send lethal weapons to Russia. Note that the U.S. at this point still hasn't provided a concrete evidence supporting its claim, but media reports say the U.S. has evidence suggesting that Chinese state-owned companies has been sending non-lethal equipment like helmets and flak jackets to Russia. But this means that China still hasn't outrightly violated those Western-led sanctions against Moscow. Now, China, for its part, is saying that its relationship with Moscow is based on the principles of non-confrontation, non-targeting of third parties, and non-alignment. It also says that it has the right to conduct foreign relations with any other independent sovereign nations, and that is none of the U.S.'s business. But if China does indeed go ahead to sell lethal weapons to Russia, that is certainly going to cross a hard red line with the U.S., and it's likely to attract an avalanche of sanctions against Beijing.
Oh, thanks for that. Lo Minmin speaking to us live there from Shanghai.